everybody, welcome to lecture part 2. In the last lecture we talked about the conditions in Europe that gave rise in the 19th century to three radical different political economic systems: socialism, Marxism, and anarchism. And we talked about socialism, and now we're going to talk about another socialist program. I want you guys to don't get confused. When I was younger, I thought socialism and Marxism or communism were radically different things, maybe similar but quite different. But actually, the Marxism is simply a very specific interpretation or application of socialist thought. So it's not really like a whole different school in a sense. It's simply socialism is a kind of big umbrella of approach to a radically oriented society. And Marxism is like a specific interpretation of what that socialism vision would look like. Now, you guys may have noticed in the last lecture, I did not mention any socialist godfathers, godmothers, theorists behind socialism. It's not because there weren't some. There were absolutely some. But there's like a whole variety of them. So you can't pick like one specific father of socialism. That's, again, for the sake of time, because we can't go into it too deeply. In any case, but there's a whole variety of intellectuals and thinkers of various stripes who are under the general umbrella of socialist thought. Marxism is a version of socialist thought, but it's much more specific. It's so specific that it has a gentleman's name attached to it. Of course, you guys know you don't have to be a Jeopardy quiz champion to know that's Karl Marx. So Marxism is Marx's interpretation, and quite specifically, what that socialist path, revolution, progress should look like. So if that helps you guys a little bit. Same thing with communism. We use the word communism. Communism is really just kind of the application of Marxist thought. So Marxism, communism are not just distinct things. Now Marxism is more specific because, again, it's his particular version of socialism. But communism is an outgrowth of Marxism, essentially trying to apply Marxist thought. Now, again, there's interpretations even of Marxism with that. Like, there's a lot of arguments over among various communists over exactly what constitutes proper, like, Marxist philosophy. But communism is kind of the working model of attempting to apply Marxist thought. Okay, I think we're good. All right. So Marxism and/or communism is a specific vision of socialism and a prescription in how to achieve socialism. Just like socialism, Marxism or communism has exactly the same goal: complete social, economic, political equality, enforced or administered by the people or the state. And the ultimate goal is exactly the same as socialism, which is a utopian future for all mankind. That's the long term. Now, again, you see the terms there: Marxism, communism. Don't get sidetracked on that. Marxism is a specific philosophy coming out of Karl Marx. Communism is kind of its application. All right. So, and I won't go too deep because, again, it's been a U.S. history class. I won't dive too deeply into this, but just to give you guys a little context here. So, Karl Marx was born in 1818, lived to 1883. I'm not concerned with you guys knowing the dates for that. I just want you to be kind of generally aware of the general time period, which is the 19th century. And his collaborator, Friedrich Engels, who plays an important role but not as critical as Marx, who lived from 1820 to 1895. Again, I'm not worried about the dates of life. I just want you to know they're 19th century thinkers, and that's when the influence is going to become critically important. In 1847, Marx and Engels joined together a radical group of German socialists and revolutionaries. He is a socialist. So again, he's not leaving socialism. Again, don't this one more time. Karl Marx does not leave socialism. He remains in socialism, but he believes socialism is too diverse in various competing philosophies. It's not specific enough. So he writes basically his own personalized interpretation of socialism. That's what Marxism is. Two of them collaborate and published the Communist Manifesto in 1848. Eventually, he published the first volume of his classic Das Kapital, that's the German or the Capital, in 1867. Then on the right, you see the cover page of the Communist Manifesto from 1848. All right. Now, Again, Marx has a more specific interpretation. This is important, so you add in your notes. Now, again, grab your pen and pencil if you have not already, and this is what you want to be taking down. So, world's history and future according to Marx. Now, Marx argues all human history, that we're talking about earliest recorded history till now, the 19th century, boils down to one core issue. A conflict for resources between the haves, those are the kings, the high class, the aristocracy, and the have-nots, everybody else, the vast majority of the population. So you have kind of that pyramid, right? At the very top, you have the monarchy, the nobility, perhaps the clergy, the church, the well-to-do, the upper middle class, top of the paragraph, but the vast majority, top of the pyramid, the vast majority of humanity in the lower rungs, the masses, and their life is difficult. They have little, typically no political voice, no rights. They're barely surviving. Marx and Engels state in the Communist Manifesto that history of all existing societies has been the history of this class struggle, as that small core of the elite controls things for their personal benefit. They exploit the workers who are beneath them. The workers don't like it, but they feel trapped, and for various reasons, both for power, police, violence, religion, for all those reasons. They're ignorance to be part of it too. They're stuck, they're trapped on the lower rungs of this kind of pyramid of labor. So Marx and Engels, writing about this, say that there of course, there's a conflict between the oppressors. These are the bad guys, ladies too. Make it gender exclusive. It's for both. And the term Marx uses, and Engels does too, and it's critical for you guys to know, so make sure you guys write this down. They refer to these oppressors as the bourgeoisie. This is the government, the rich, the aristocracy, the well-to-do, the middle classes, who are all profiting from this capitalistic system. Whether they call it capitalistic or not, go back far in the ancient world, you can argue whether that's capitalistic or not. But to a certain degree, I suppose it was. The system's working well for them. They have the palaces, they got the ponies for the kids, they got the pools in the back, they got the Bentley in the garage, the chariots. They have the slaves, honestly, because back in that time that became the servants. And society's working very well for them. Rich, pampered, protected. But of course, the vast majority of the population is not living that way. They're stuck in the mud and muck of a rice field, or working their way, dragging some stone upside of a pyramid. The vast majority of the people, vast majority, these are the oppressed, the exploited by the higher classes. We call them the proletariat according to Marx. Think of the blue-collar workers. Blue-collar, by the way, the term just means working typically with your hands, usually maybe semi-skilled to no-skilled, typically no education, no rights, living hand-to-mouth, stuck in this working class, that is a working class society that does not benefit them. They have very few of the benefits of the nation or place they live. Almost all their labor is for the benefit and privilege of someone else, according to Marx. Now, obviously, this is a terrible way to live, and so Marx says that needs to change. Socialists argue that too, right? So remember, Marx is a socialist, but he's laying out a very specific description of how that's going to be. So, now again, Marx being specific, he lays out a very specific philosophy or chain of events that are necessary to bring about the socialist revolution, Marxist revolution. You know, socialism is what he wants, but just since it's his version, we'll call it Marxism. It's a social revolution. To bring that about, he has a series of steps that must take place. And the first one is you must educate the masses in this new Marxist/socialist consciousness. What do? You let them know that the world around them is it's not stuck the way it is right now. That reality can be different. For example, you see that the painting there on the left by the great Spanish muralist Diego Rivera, and he's showing a typical socialist Marxist outlook at labor. You see people in the foreground, that boy carrying, I don't know what that is, as a guava. I'm not sure what he's carrying, or anyways, he's carrying some kind of agriculture product. You see various people cutting probably sugar cane there in the background. I think that's probably sugar cane. Some girls are leaving for, and then you see the ruling class carrying guns. These are making people work for them, and then you see the wealthiest class. This guy's also quite light-skinned. We see these hunting dogs right there. Again, it's a part of control. Laying in a hammock, doing nothing. So in the Marxist ideas, let people know, yes, this is very unfair. Hello, you're working your tail off and you're getting almost none of the benefits from that situation. That has to change. It must change. And, by the way, it can change to a much better future. Additionally, Marx will argue, be aware that the reason why the system has always been maintained is because whenever someone spoke out against it, they're ruthlessly killed or suppressed. That's the painting there you see on the right, also by Rivera, showing some Mexican vaqueros or cowboys who have found the body of someone who has been ultimately killed by the capitalistic, traditional, feudal system, in this case in Mexico. He's been whipped, and now they're untying his hands. He's been executed. You can see the sadness there as they're tenderly covering his body. And those who covering his body with the kind of red cape there, that is socialism. Not just by me. He didn't come across that color. Just you look at his painting palette. Rivera was painting like, oh no, we're going with let's see, yellow or blue. No, he chose red. Red is the color of the revolution, showing that the exploited masses is what's happening, and things can be different. And we realize that now because of the scientific world around us. Realize for the first time in human history, for the first time, we realize that we can completely reorient the entire society to be much more fair to all of us. No longer do you have this scenario like you see here, left side screen, where you have a few profiting off the labor of the many. Now it's going to be equal. And the way you do that is, first step, educate the people. We're talking rallies, schools, labor activism, marches. Let them know things can be different, and we're going to show you how. Marx argues once you educate the masses, then you're next ready for the next critical state. Now, by the way, it might take a while to education of the masses, but it's going to happen. Now, eventually, the masses realize that things must change. It's time for the revolution. Now, the revolution, according to Marx, naturally will be violent. So why is it violent? Because according to Marx, the wealthy are not going to willingly give up the goodies, the toys. Not going to do that. As we talked about in the previous lecture, right? The socialists all split on this. With the wealthy, the high classes, the aristocracy, the nobility, the rich, are they ever going to have an emotional, psychological awakening? Well, if they do, great, and they join the revolution, wonderful. But many of them will not. And so you're going to have to use force. By the way, because they use force on you, right? And so you'd have to use force on them. And that means a violent revolution to take over the entire nation and end this exploitation of the masses by the bourgeoisie, the ruling classes, and we're going to put that to an end. In this case, Rivera illustrates this actually from Mexican history much earlier, showing an Aztec jaguar warrior who has pinned a conquistador to the ground and now stabbed him with it looks like probably an obsidian knife. Now he's kind of mixing Mexican history with Spanish colonization, but that is in many ways a fitting image of the oppressed class, in this case native peoples of Mexico or Mexico, resisting the exploitation, in this case, of the Spaniards or conquistadors. Once the violent revolution has seized control of the nation, and while that's taking place, Marx argues the third step is there temporarily have to be a dictatorship of the Marxist core, socialist core leadership to quickly complete the initial revolution. Because look, so when the fighting breaks out, when the strikes turn into violence and they seize the imperial palace, you don't have time for long democratic meetings and discussions like what should we do next. You'd have a small core of individuals who can rapidly make critical important decisions, just like a general in the military, right? When you come up for a big battle, you don't have time for a vote. Like what do you guys all want to do? You don't have time for that, right? You'd have a general and he quickly makes decisions. Could be she too. Quickly makes the decisions. So Marx argues you have to have a small core leadership that's educated in socialism, Marxism, that they know what comes next, what's required, and they quickly make decisions. So during that brief time period, you will have a very strong leadership core running the revolution. In fact, he calls it dictatorship, because we're not going to allow, we don't have time for that. Additionally, we have to rapidly divide up the property, the land, the businesses. Remember, under socialism, there's no private ownership of property and land. It's all equally shared by all. Factories, land, resources, all equally shared. Marxism is exactly the same because it's a socialist vision, right? So we're going to do that quickly and efficiently, right? Dictatorship is required. When you use dictatorship, that comes out of the Greek word, does not necessarily mean bad. Now, when you and I say dictatorship, that always means negative. But out of the original Greek, it was not negative, it just meant great power, kind of unchecked power. So when Marx is using that, he's not saying you have to be a horrible person, a tyrant. He's simply saying, no, you have absolute power for a time to complete the violent revolution, to successfully complete the revolution, and then to rapidly reorganize society for this new socialist reality. At that point, the dictatorship simply will naturally dissolve because the crisis is past. Now it becomes a complete people's democracy. Like this is step 4, for his mention, complete democratic Marxist reality. Run entirely by the people. No more leadership per se. Now the people just get together in mass meetings and make common sense solutions because they're all on the same page, according to Marxist thought. They equally share labor, resources, land, everything, food, it's all equally shared by all. They simply make natural common sense decisions based on the good of everybody. No longer need a government telling them, like, here's what you do. No, it's pretty common sense what they need to do. They get together, they discuss it, they vote on it, and make decisions on where does the water go, where do we farm, does food need to be shifted around from one place to another. They just simply, fairly, equally, as a democratic group, naturally make those decisions. The two images you see there are two kind of visions of this socialist vision. The one on the left is from China. And you even see an element, you see the whole young guards marching forward. And they're carrying a picture of Mao. Mao would argue that's probably still in step 3, the necessary dictatorship, and Mao, of course, heading that naturally, as he would see it. On the right, you have a classic painting by Courbet showing, in this case, rock breakers, kind of showing two things. Is this is what the revolution is for people doing these breaking jobs, in this case, breaking rocks. But they should be not doing that for very little wages. They should be doing that equally with all else. These are the kind of people that Marxism or socialism is going to rescue. What is the Marxist goals you talked about? You guys already know, right? Same as socialism. Fair, economically, socially, politically, for all. And according to Marxism, as according to socialism, because remember, they're twins, this ultimately, not short term, but ultimately, because all people in the world realize this is the best way to live, all nations in the world eventually have a socialist, Marxist revolution, and those countries will become Marxist or socialist. Remember, it's really socialist, becomes socialist. Socialism eventually sweeps the entire world because it just makes sense as a Marxist or socialist intellectual would posit or suggest. So what does that mean? They now live in a classless society, worker-controlled factories. No more capitalism of any kind. No more. It's again equally shared by all. No more. What's the price today? The price is it's available to everybody equally to all. Everything is shared. Eventually, that brings peace to all nations because no longer nations fighting for resources. Those wars are about gluttony, essentially, the high class in the past, about glory and having more. And I want a bigger palace to show my magnificence or to bring power to my ego. All that is gone because all that is selfish pursuits. Now simply everyone can get together and fairly, equitably, democratically make wise decisions. How to divide resources, water, land. No one wants to fight. That's what the kings did. That's the aristocracy. They didn't care about the masses because they're the ones dying, right? According to Marx and socialists. So that would make any sense for a Marxist world. They'll all fairly share all things in common. Now, there's a couple of last things here as we get into the end of Marxism that are critical for you guys to know. Why Marxism has had, and socialism too, has had such great appeal for many people around the world in the 19th century and in the 20th century. And to some degree today. Communism today, Marxism is not very strong. It's pretty weak in most cases. Socialism, though, as you guys know, has quite a bit of vitality to it. We can get into why that is a little bit later. But so what is it about communist or Marxist thought, and socialism too, that is so appealing? Now, obviously, part of it is if you're being crushed under a stack of bills and you feel you have no voice to change it and you have no hope for things to get better, you can see why socialism and Marxism would have great appeal to you. But there's some additional things that are important. Marxism, Socialism. It's a progressive call for equality for all oppressed groups. That is big. Do you see the all oppressed groups? So in an era when traditional liberal democracies, think the United States, maybe Great Britain, maybe France, spoke with mixed voices or complete opposition to such progressive policies, you can see where Marxism stepping in might offer a way forward. Here's what I mean by that. Marxists called for an end to racial equality, gender equality, end to all exploitation of workers, promised a universal education for all, and an end to colonialism and imperialism. That is big. Make sure you guys write this down. So in your notes, make sure you guys pause for a minute. You gotta write that down. So that the idea of racial equality, big. Gender equality, big. Ending exploiting workers, big. Promise universal education, which again, most of the world did not have that. And end to all colonialism and imperialism. Remember, that's come out in the 19th century. Europe has massive colonies in this time period. Nearly all of Africa is colonized. Much of Asia colonized. Parts of the Middle East are colonized. So if you're in, say, Vietnam or in Egypt, many of the countries around the world, and not only maybe you are suffering as a lower class, denied any real access to participation in government, your family struggling through poverty, but if you can read, maybe you probably couldn't, but if you could, and read about Marxism, you could see why if you're a young, say, Vietnamese student in countries been colonized by France, you have deep resentment about that. You see the French treat you, exploit you, and you say Marxism fits the bill for all of these, brings about economic equality, social equality, political equality, into colonialism, into imperialism. All that is packaged in Marxism. You could see why that individual would say, that sounds awful good to me. That's the way of the future. Basic tenets of Marxism. Now, the good news is I'm not so concerned you guys write all of these down. In fact, only a couple of these I'll let you guys know right now, the ones I really want you guys to write down. So I'm not sure of all of these, but some of these you're probably already aware of, but I'll mention them and I'll highlight a couple of these especially. The first one, abolition of private property. No more private property. Everything is held in common by all people. Heavy progressive tax on those who are wealthy. By the way, that's going to end because if they're wealthy, they're not going to be wealthy for long. So that's really transitionary. I'm not so concerned with 3 and 4. The state does control all communication, transportation. That way it's free to everybody. For example, you don't have to save up money to buy a train ticket. You probably get a voucher. Voucher will take you where you need to go. Now, if you want to travel a lot in 1 month, maybe the Democratic local committee say, you've already had your travel, time for someone else, so you don't get to go. State control factories and economies, of course, because the people control all things. So there's no individual companies, there's not Chevron, there's not Target, there's none of that. It's just state-owned, people-owned businesses across the board. Grocery stores, clothing stores, gas stations, you name it, all owned, controlled by the people. Everyone must participate equally in labor. In the theory, free education for all children, no more child labor. Again, that's very progressive for this era. It's the 19th century, right? A lot of Western countries do not even have laws on the books for that, but Marx is calling for that. Now, so far, for many people, that these 9 things, some of them sound very good. Maybe a few individuals, not few, a significant number of individuals in the United States might have some concerns. But so far, much of it looks good. But Marxism is atheistic. Marxism believes there is no God, and the religion actually is problematic because religion dupes people, as Marx would say, into accepting the status quo. So religion needs to be stopped because religion confuses people, gives them an alternative moral system that's not helpful in a Marxist world. By the way, Marx believes there is no God, so that's simply a waste. It's a conservative waste of time. And we must eliminate that. So Marxism seeks to end religious practice. There's much more about it. Again, just like the last lecture, I'm not talking about how Marxism actually played out. This is simply the theory. And we'll talk about later lectures how Marxism actually plays out. So this is strictly the theory, not saying how it actually worked, right? Simply saying, here's a theory, here's a theory. For example, end to racial equality, gender inequality. And most of us say, absolutely. Well, how did Marx actually do with those things? But that's for a later date, for a later lecture. For this lecture, this is the end. So we'll stop right here. So until the next one, part 3, which we'll get to shortly, and that is anarchism. So until then, take care, everybody.